Actually, let's just get started now anyway. So I just want to start off with an agenda. Just what we're going to be covering off today. Firstly, just a brief history of Microsoft and Citrix and the relationship that they've had over 30 odd years. Really demonstrates that they do work quite closely together. Secondly, we're going to be discussing the considerations around ensuring a smooth transition or a smooth migration to Windows 10 and how Citrix can help with that. So we're going to be looking at a few challenges and how Citrix can actually help you overcome those challenges. Then we're going to discuss some different delivery options that Citrix provide for delivering Windows 10. We can go through those and when they're appropriate and when they're not. Next, we will be talking about Windows Virtual Desktops. This is Microsoft's new or not yet released foray into the virtual desktop market. So we'll have a quick look at what that is and what it's all about and what that actually means to Citrix as well. And finally, we're going to just give some tips on some fairly high level but quite important optimization tips when you're looking at delivering Windows 10 in VDI. So let's get going. Right, so Citrix and Microsoft have, they've had a long history of working together. Way back in, I think it was 1989 when Citrix first started, or back then they were actually called Citrix, until they another company claimed trademark on them. But anyway, they were focused on, although they wanted to focus on providing remote access to Microsoft's OS/2 operating system. So even way back then, Microsoft granted them an OS/2 license and access to the source code. 2 years later, they released their first product, which was called Citrix Multi-User 1.0. So as you can see, even from the very beginning, there was some sort of relationship and collaboration between Microsoft and Citrix. So around that time, when Citrix Multi-User was released, Microsoft at that point actually announced that they were moving away from OS/2, the OS/2 platform, and they wanted to start moving towards Windows. So the original Citrix Multi-User product was pretty much useless, and as a result, Citrix were they were on the verge of closing. They almost didn't make it. They ended up getting some investment, some of which came from Microsoft actually, and as a result, a little bit later, they pushed out Citrix Multi-User 2.0, which was fully compatible with DOS back in the day. So from there, they went from strength to strength, with Citrix signing license agreements, to allow them to develop the ICA protocol in things like NT 3.5 and NT 4.0. And then in 95, I think it was, they released Citrix WinFrame, which is kind of the first product that most people kind of think of as Citrix's first product. It was really that first real multi-user, Windows multi-user experience. So throughout the years, then there's been various marketing and development initiatives between Citrix and Microsoft. As Citrix used the Microsoft platform, that helps Microsoft as well. So they're happy to go ahead with it because to use a Citrix product, you need to buy a Microsoft license. So they're all happy about that as well. So this has continued even things more recently with things like the Citrix Cloud, the virtual apps and desktop service. It was the first platform to allow Windows 10, the Windows 10 operating system in Azure to run. Obviously, you could run it through things like MSDN subscriptions and things like that, but this was the first sort of production product that could actually deliver Windows 10 in Azure. That's changed a little bit now, but and even more recently, what they claim is what they class as the integration of the Citrix Cloud Virtual Apps and Desktop service with Windows Virtual Desktop. So I'll talk a little bit more about that as well when we get onto the WVD section. So you can see brief history, but all the way throughout there's been a partnership and a relationship. I think more as they do seem to work more as a partnership than as competitors, although there are competing products. Yeah, there's a bit of both. So I think that's the nature of IT these days, is that there is that cross between competition and collaboration. Right. So, sorry. So the next section I just want to talk about is really around the considerations for a smooth Windows 10 migration. So these are sort of some of the challenges that present themselves, and then we can have a look at some of the options or technologies or tools that Citrix can use to help overcome these challenges. First one is all about the apps. After you migrate, will your apps work? This is probably the number one challenge that I've seen when looking at Windows 10 migrations, is application compatibility or application repackaging and things like that. This is a real big challenge that we see as most customers we're seeing are moving to Windows 10. So the challenge is, since Windows 10 is launched, we could also look at things like BYOD. So these BYOD policies have enabled employees to upgrade their devices to the new OS without any IT kind of oversight or management capabilities. And this is stopping IT from being able to test application compatibility before the OS migration. Or similarly, even if you do know the Windows 10 migration is going to be going ahead, it's really, we don't want those things stalled. We don't want things stalled because of waiting for application compatibility. So apps are generally built for, or sometimes are built for, a specific operating system or browser for that matter. So the migration to Windows 10 and Edge introduces these compatibility problems. The apps might even break from version to version, so it could require upgrades and things like that. So there's quite a lot of testing that's involved, and to make sure that not only does it run, but all the functions within the applications run as expected. And the other challenge, I guess, is around employees needing that secure access to applications. So as they're more mobile, there might be, like, say, these BYOD devices, or it could be a corporate laptop where they need to have access remotely. And they could be running it on a different operating system, or applications needing to be run on different operating systems. So we need to find a solution that allows apps from multiple operating systems or browsers to run from that corporate infrastructure, and have that independent from the OS of the endpoint. So obviously, Citrix's solution would be to use something like a Windows Virtual Apps and Desktops, whether that's cloud or on-premises, to publish those applications using potentially a legacy operating system. So if we know that Windows 7, we've got Windows 7 only compatible applications, what we can do is we can push the rollout of Windows 10, and we can run some legacy applications, could be on Server 2008 or Server 2012, and we can run those applications on there and publish them. So not only does that give us the security of keeping those applications located on the corporate network, it also will just allow us to continue with the rollout while we tackle this application compatibility issue. So once the customer or the company, once we find out how we're going to address that problem, whether it's an upgrade to the application, whether it's refactoring it, moving to another application, moving to some SaaS-based application, which is what we're seeing a lot of, we can do that without actually stalling the Windows 10 migration. Yeah, so I think that's one of the key ones. And just speaking of the application migration, there is another tool that Citrix have, which is not really used that much, and there hasn't been a huge amount of development over the last couple of years. But Citrix still has the App DNA product, which is a compatibility or application compatibility testing tool. So with that, I mean, Citrix say that it can reduce the complexity of application management of up to 90% now. I haven't quite seen that high a reduction, but it definitely does save time as a first pass of looking at your potential application or incompatible applications. So for those of you who are not aware, what AppDNA will do is it will analyze the application. So you can either import it as an MSI or you can run executables as well. And it looks at known limitations and known errors. So it could be things like within the MSI package, it specifically has a hard-coded operating system requirement or hard-coded paths or requirements for certain DLL versions that have been superseded. So it can do that, and it will highlight those and recommend any fixes as well if there are any that they're aware of. So it's a good there are a few false positives with it, but it's definitely a good first pass to look at just how much effort you think that application compatibility or application testing and assessment task is going to take. Right, so the next challenge is really around the update cadence of Windows 10. So with Windows 10, the update cadence is obviously increased. So we're now looking at a biannual major feature update, which is effectively a new operating system, or plus the regular security updates, and that can be a real challenge with keeping track of that and keeping that updated. We've also got challenges around if you've got a disparate organization where you've got offices in multiple regions, then you're going to have the challenge of this data having to traverse to all your branch offices with the feature update, which could be 2 gig, 3 gig of data having to travel over potentially a very small link. So we've got challenges around that, and also around the maintenance of it, of continually having to update to keep current and keep supported across your estate. And then again, if you've got things like BYOD, that's another one. If we're not managing, if you've got a BYOD policy in place, then not being able to manage that deployment is going to also introduce other issues. So to get around that, one option is around using Citrix Virtual Apps and Desktops, as in published desktops, and using VDI or session hosts, VDAs, as your central desktop delivery mechanism. So what that will do is it allows you to centrally perform the upgrade, so that when we do a feature update, we've got that being done. If we're looking at non-persistent VDI or non-persistent desktops, we've got that ability to deploy the update once to the master image, and then once that gets rolled out across the Citrix estate, you've then got everyone on the same version, meaning you don't have these issues of over a period of weeks or months with disparate versions of Windows builds where people are not updating their operating system because of maybe time or availability of the update package and things like that. So centralizing really makes sense, and actually it makes this high Windows, this regular Windows update a simpler task. If you don't move to that model and you're just using traditional Windows 10, this is going to be an ongoing process for you that you're going to have to continue to maintain and continue to test as well. So can put quite a burden on your IT. Right. Next one is really around managing all devices. Yes, I know we're talking about Windows 10, but really we need to we want to try to find a holistic way of managing all devices. So yes, you may have Windows 10, but quite likely you're also going to have mobile devices and tablets that you may need to manage. You've got Mac devices. You may, again, as I was saying, BYOD, which is, we're seeing that becoming a little bit more prevalent. These sorts of things, we need to make sure that those devices are secure and compliant, and that, these are generally mobile devices. So it means they're often not in the corporate network. So really what we need is a solution that does not rely on corporate network connectivity, such as Active Directory, domain, joined, group policy, things like that. So the solution that, so Citrix's solution is really around Citrix Endpoint Management, which was Citrix M Mobile. So all the Citrix products have been renamed. I think it was late last year. So Citrix M Mobile is now called Citrix Endpoint Management. Now it's the endpoint management or enterprise mobility management solution. And what that can do is it can allow you to deploy a set of common policies across your Windows devices, your Mac devices, iOS, Android, BlackBerry, all in that environment. So you've got that, the idea is you've got this efficiency of delivering policies across, through one platform. And there we can add controls to ensure that users can access data or devices from any authorized device. The other thing that we can use with that is around delivering the applications to those endpoint devices. If it's a Windows 10 device, then yes, we can deliver it directly to the device. We can push applications out to the device. If it's not a Windows device, we can push out receiver to those devices, regardless of what they are on. They can then get access to their Windows virtual apps or desktops, published applications, and continue to work as required or as expected. So it has things like, depending on your endpoint devices, we can either look at using a device level policy, which would be more around a fully managed device, and then also MAM or application level policies as well, which is where we're seeing things within that mobile management space. We're seeing it moving more towards a focus on the application management rather than the full device. But Zen Mobile or Citrix Endpoint Management can do both. So you may be thinking, yes, but Intune can do that, and that's true. So Intune can do a lot of these. There's quite a few other MDM providers, and it really depends on your requirements. So I think Citrix's product has a few components or features that Intune doesn't, and vice versa. For example, Mac OS is a good example. Um, Zen Mobile will natively support Mac management, whereas Intune doesn't. It does have a connector into a third party, so you can use something like Jamf and have a connector, which means that within Intune portal, you can kind of manage it through Jamf. But yeah, so this is really, it really depends on your requirement, and that's something that we'd be happy to talk to you about if that's something that you're interested in. Next one is really around securing the company data. We've been speaking about applications, but it's not only about the apps, it's also about the data. So when I'm talking about data loss here for a migration, I'm not talking necessarily around DLP and that data leakage. I'm talking about data being deleted or removed or gone. So once they migrate, that data they had on their local machine is gone. Finding so the challenge we've got here is trying to look at finding all that data, and then how do we back that up, and then how do we place that back onto that endpoint device, so that they can continue on consuming it once they're migrated. So this one is really, we're looking at share file. So in this scenario, what we can do is we can shorten that migration sort of effort by just eliminating that risk of data loss. So as I was saying before, what you would normally do is you'd have to determine where all the data resides, whether that's on local desktops, on home drives, network shares, could be on Dropbox, could be a whole raft of locations. And from there, we need to determine how that can be accessed from the new device, and whether, and with this new mobile world, how can we access it, whether we're on the corporate network or off the corporate network. So with ShareFile, or in its new name, which is Citrix Content Collaboration, that's their enterprise file and sync tool. So what we can do is we can store the data either in the cloud, or it can be the data physically located on premises, but with the data, a control plane located in the cloud. And this control plane makes that data accessible from anywhere. You don't need to be on the corporate network to actually access that data. Now, when we're talking about that, we can store the data directly into ShareFile, and that would be something similar to what you see with OneDrive or Box or Dropbox. It's cloud native storage. The other thing that we can do with ShareFile is we can actually access NTFS-based shares, SharePoint, or OneDrive directly through the ShareFile client, which means we're amalgamating and enumerating all the application data repositories all within one tool, and we can apply policies to those as well. So this is a really good tool to look at managing your data, particularly if you've got data in multiple locations. What else is there with that? So the other thing that we have with ShareFile is around the audit capability. So when we're talking, again, if we start looking at a DLP, we can see the detailed audit logs of what's been shared, by who, how many downloads, where it's being accessed, and things like that. The other area when we're looking at protection of data is around, if we look back on the Zen Mobile side, Zen Mobile can be used to apply Windows Information Protection policies. So Windows Information Protection, or WIP, which is built into Windows 10, allows the enterprise to have policies implemented where you can protect or containerize certain pieces of data or applications. So yes, while Windows Information Protection is doing the security, you need a tool to be able to apply those relevant policies. So you can use something like Citrix Zen Mobile or Unified Endpoint Management to do that. Right, so they're kind of just four sort of areas of some of the challenges that you may see when looking at Windows 10 and moving to Windows 10. So Citrix have got a bunch of options. I know we spoke a little bit there around share files and mobile, but moving forward, the focus here will be around delivering a Windows 10 desktop. So we're going to have a look at what options we've got there. So these are kind of the main ones of delivering Windows 10 desktops or published applications that are available at the moment from Citrix. So the first one, Citrix Virtual Apps and Desktops. This is actually the traditional on-premises, what we know as XenApp and XenDesktop. Again, this is the rebrand, so that's that. Citrix Virtual Apps and Desktop Service is a Citrix Cloud hosted service, which is effectively the almost the equivalent of XenApp and XenDesktop service, or XenApp and XenDesktop, but in the cloud. Virtual, what's the next one? Virtual Desktop Essentials and Virtual Apps Essentials. These are cut down, more turnkey solutions that have been around for quite a while. So, for example, the Virtual App Essentials, which was originally called XenApp Essentials, was a replacement to Microsoft's Remote App product, which went end of life, I think it was in end of 2017, so quite a while ago. So it was touted as the replacement for that. So these are quite small turnkey solutions. The last one there is new. So this was actually only announced at Citrix Synergy last week or week before last. So I might just touch. I want to touch a little bit more on what that is and why that is different. Because that's quite a different approach to what the other ones are. But let's quickly just go through the different sort of high-level architecture diagrams, conceptual diagrams. Here you see Citrix Virtual Apps and Desktops. This is your traditional on-premises architecture. You can see there with the control layer, it does say on-premises, but that could also be hosted in your Azure, so in the customer Azure IaaS, platform tenant. So in that case, you could run. You'd have your site, so you got your delivery controllers. You would need database to store your site database, monitoring and logging database. You need Citrix licensing, RDS licensing. You need a server to host the director and studio for management. All those things would be, I say on premises, but they could actually also be located in your IaaS, Azure IaaS. Similarly with the access layer, we've got Citrix Gateway, which is our NetScaler Gateway, and Storefront. When we look at the resources, there's a few options that we've got there. So the VDAs, or the workloads, they can either be in Azure, AWS, or on-premises. So on your, I've got there VMware, Citrix, and Microsoft hypervisors. That could also be Nutanix as well, which I haven't added in there, but that's another technology that is supported there. I'm sure you're probably all familiar with this type of model. This has generally been the model since version 7, although the resource locations have been extended as the capabilities have come through. Virtual apps and desktop service. This is the Citrix Cloud approach. I think some of the key things here you'll see is if we have a look at, if we start from the access layer, we've actually got two options here. Natively, so as part of the service, you will get the Citrix Gateway service and Workspace, which basically means so Citrix will host those services for you, the Citrix Workspace and the gateway service. The gateway service is a globally distributed gateway with, I think, about 10 points of presence globally. So very well suited for organizations that have multi-regions around, globally dispersed regions. What they'll do there is they all connect to the same URL, and they'll then be directed to the closest NetScaler gateway POP and pass traffic through. There were, until fairly recently, there've been a few limitations with that approach, with things like not supporting multi-factor authentication. That's been fixed, and there is now, it does support native one-time PIN. So what we were seeing beforehand was, a lot of people would stick with traditional, run the Citrix gateway and storefront services themselves, but point that into the Citrix Cloud service. So there you can see Citrix Cloud in the control layer. That will handle all the brokering, handles the licensing, handles the database, and the monitoring and management is all handled there through Citrix. One difference to the on-premises version is this concept of a cloud connector, and that's effectively a broker of, or a proxy of the connection brokers. So those machines will be domain joined, and that basically provides that link or that hook into those various resource locations. That's an outbound connection only, so to maintain security, it's an outbound connection from the connector to the Citrix Cloud platform. Again, you'll see available on a bunch of different resource locations. One extra one there that I've added is Google Cloud, so it does support running workloads on GCP. Right, next one is Setup Essentials. Effectively the same, well, it uses the same hosting tenant, so the virtual apps and desktop service. It's run under that same control plane. You don't actually get a choice here of using an on-prem storefront or gateway service with virtual apps. You must use the Citrix Workspace and gateway service that's provided by Citrix. And the other, I guess, main point to note there is you'll see that the only resource location with virtual apps is Azure. So you will need an Azure tenant for this to work. The management of it is much reduced, so you can't do things like apply Citrix policies. The management platform for this is a HTML, like a wizard-based kind of tool. So it's a very basic, but if that's all you need, obviously it comes at a much cheaper price point. The VDAs can be used. The VDAs can, you can create your own custom images for that as well, and that's that will support Windows 10 multi-session, I believe, but that's not yet released. Zendesk Essentials is effectively the same. The difference here is that rather than publishing applications, you can only publish desktops. I won't really go into much detail about that, but that's effectively the same thing. Now this is the Citrix Managed Desktop. Now the key thing, the main difference with this is where you see the resources, it's Citrix Managed Azure. So that's the main thing. So this is the first product that Citrix have released where they're managing the workloads. So in this case, you even need any Azure presence at all. Well, I say that you don't need any Azure IaaS presence, and you may not even need Azure AD. What I'll do is I will on the next slide, I've got some details, a little bit more detail around it. But I think that again, this is more geared towards those essentials-based products, where it's a real turnkey solution. The idea of it is really around simplification. So in this case, Citrix actually provide a base image that you can use, or you do have the option of uploading a custom image there as well. Quite interesting that they're doing this. I think it was a common misconception with the virtual apps and desktops portfolio that people thought Citrix managed the whole lot, and now we can see that now they can, because this was something that was never available beforehand. So there are a couple of other differences. So as I said here, Citrix managed Azure for the workloads. That will always be the case. The workloads, and now this is something also that's different, is they can be Azure AD Join. So at the moment, all the other iterations require the VDAs or the workloads to be domain joined, whether that's Azure AD domain services or just AD domain services. With this one, it can be either. So the workloads can be either Azure AD joined or Azure AD domain services joined. It doesn't support AD domain services. But if there's a trust there, then we can put VNet peering in. Authentication, when we're looking at that, we can have, and this is where I was saying we can be Azure AD managed by Citrix. So in that case, you don't even need any Azure presence. I can't imagine that being used very much other than for a proof of concept, because you've got this totally kind of segregated identity, which there may be some use cases, but I don't think that's going to be the main use case. I think the main use case will be around customer managed Azure AD. So the authentication, you'll authenticate using Azure AD. It will support the same kind of things that with federation and things like that as well. So all that will be the same, and that will also include things like the conditional access. VDAs, so these are the options you've got. You've got the Windows 10 Enterprise, the Windows 10 Enterprise Virtual Desktop, which is the new multi-session, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, and Windows Server 2016. So yeah, it's an interesting approach that Citrix are taking with this. The screenshot there is really a sample of that's how you get started to provision a device. So as you can see, it's very much a basic wizard-driven type of approach. The idea, the key design tenets of this is around simplicity, and that's one of the key things they wanted to focus on. Right. So the next thing I wanted to talk to you about is around Windows Virtual Desktop. So if we have a look at Windows Virtual Desktop, the architecture is actually quite similar. Sure, the names are different, but there is a virtual desktop web and a gateway service, which are really been drawn from the RD gateway service and the RD web. You have the WVD service, which is really the platform, and that is hosted by Microsoft in Azure. I should note that at the moment, this is still in tech preview. So this is public preview. This is not yet generally available. So you can sign up for it, but it hasn't gone GA, which means there are some limitations to it. And yeah, as you can see from the virtual desktop, the resources must be in Azure as well. So this is, they've also got a concept of a WVD agent, which is similar to the Cloud Connector piece of software that will allow the outbound connection to talk between your workloads and the WVD service. So quite similar to the App Essentials product, more so than virtual apps and desktops. So some of the key points around this: Microsoft Managed Control Plane. So Microsoft will be managing that, similar to how Citrix are managing the Citrix Cloud services. One of the key things which I think could be quite limiting is around the Azure only workloads. So it doesn't support on-premises or any, I think that's probably one of the main ones, or any other cloud provider. Windows 10 Enterprise Multi-Session. So this is kind of where, when people are talking about WVD, this is kind of one of the big points around it, is this whole idea of this Windows 10 Enterprise Multi-Session. So rather than relying on a Windows Server 2016 or Windows Server 2019 server-based OS to provide multiple users, Windows 10 can now do that. And this should have a big impact on things like compatibility and things like that. So yes, generally things that work on Server 2016 would work on Windows 10, but not always. So this is something that's quite key and quite important piece. The other important one is around Windows 7. So as you know, Windows 7 is end of life in 2020. I think it's January 2020. If you need it longer, one option you've got is that you can run Windows 7 desktops with the extended security updates through this service. So if you're stuck with needing to run Windows 7 for some reason, this is an option. Having said that, so is the Windows Managed Desktop, I believe. As it will be integrated with Windows Virtual Desktop, it will also support this. As I mentioned before, it's currently in tech preview. So one of the things at the moment, which is quite limiting, is everything has to be done through PowerShell. So which is okay, but I think some of the modules are still being written. So things that may work one day don't necessarily work the next. Not so much of a problem now that it's public preview, but when it was in private preview, that was quite a challenge. Now the other big thing is this WVD is licensed as part of a Microsoft 365 E3 or E5, Windows 10 E3 or E5, or even an RDS Cal with software assurance. Although that one there's a bit of a caveat there. That's if you wanted to present remote desktop workloads, so Server 2016 based workloads. So effectively, you're getting it for free in a way. I say free, you're getting it included in a product that you're quite likely to have if you're moving to Windows 10. And also one of the big points is around FSLogix. So FSLogix was a great product to help with profiles on Office 365 for non-persistent VDIs. Last year, Microsoft acquired them, and they've included the FSLogix licensing as part of the WVD, which is great. I will cover that as well in the Citrix the optimization sections shortly as well. So on the face of it, WVD looks quite similar to the various Citrix Cloud offerings, and with it being included as part of the M365 E3 or the Windows 10 E3 licenses or E5 licenses, the question has been sort of raised initially is, is this going to be the end of the Citrix Workspace? Is this just going to crush it? Because why would anyone pay an extra license when you kind of get what you need with WVD? Well, my opinion, I don't think that's going to happen. I think there's so many different value adds that the Citrix Workspace can add to it. One of them on premises. So we still have a lot of users that a lot of organizations, most of their backend applications are still on premises. So you want to keep your workloads, your VDAs near your backend applications, so they should be on premises. That's probably one of the key ones. We've got a whole plethora of other advantages, as you can see on this slide here. This one is actually a Citrix slide that I've grabbed. Workspace Environment Manager, all these optimizations that we've got around Skype and Teams. Some of the other supporting products around it, like SD-WAN. You've got session recording and some of the Citrix Analytics pieces that are coming into play. Machine creation services. So there's no. This does create. There is a level of single instance management with WVD in that you can create a base image and then it will provide some scaling. So the scaling at the moment is done through scripting, but the scripting needs to be done using automation runbooks within Azure and bits and pieces. Yeah, sure, that's going to improve over time. But the reality is, I don't think we're going to see the end of Citrix Workspace. I don't think it's going to be a killer of that product. I see it a little bit similar to XenApp and RDS. RDS was fine for certain environments and smaller environments, particularly. There was no single instance management, which made it a bit harder to maintain and manage. Had more limited use cases, but for the use cases it was good in, it worked fine. And I think that's going to be the same for WVD. So the last section I would just want to talk about is around a couple of tips that for optimizing Windows 10 for VDI. So these are things that we found have made a big difference. All of them. If we quickly go through them, if we look at the Citrix Optimizer, this has really been basically redeveloped. So into a really amazing product, actually, and it's continually being developed and enhanced. What they've done now is they've basically made a list of templates, which are optimizations for various operating systems or various configurations. But they've also opened it to the community, which means you can then you've got the community feeding into the templates. So so when you're looking at your Citrix CTPs and CTAs, stuff like that, they're starting to contribute to these, which is amazing. So any of these enhancements we can get from that. The three key tasks that this performs that I've found provides the biggest benefits is around removing built-in Windows Store apps or UWP apps, disabling services, and disabling scheduled tasks. By and large, the biggest one overall is definitely the removing of the built-in UWP apps. So there's one thing you can, to improve logon performance in particular, if you do one thing, it's remove those where you can. Remove as many of them as you can, and you will see a noticeable difference in performance. Disabling services and disabling scheduled tasks. All the metrics, login VSI testing and things like that have shown Citrix Optimizer, the base Citrix Optimizer, the default ones for example, Windows 1809, Windows 10 1809, shows clear benefits of increasing user density when using something like the Citrix Optimizer. So I strongly recommend you have a look at that. The next one is more around consistency. So it's not so much optimizations. It does have some optimizations, and it can actually integrate with the optimizer. The idea of the base script image framework, BizF, is really around providing a standardized approach for deploying and creating your images. So part of that, it will deploy the images, it will install all the services, you can install applications or your tools, but then you can also do things like run the Citrix Optimizer, run cleaners, registry cleaner tools, or tasks to defrag the disks and all those sorts of things. So it's a really good tool for creating a standardized approach. That's another tool that we use quite frequently, just to create that consistency. FSLogix is the other one that I mentioned earlier. So this one is really around, for those that are not aware, one of the problems when you're looking at things like Office 365 with Exchange Online and OneDrive for Business in particular is with Exchange Online, your mailbox is now moved further away from the Outlook client, which is running on your VDA. Now, this means that you've got a performance problem. When before it was Exchange Online, you would stick your your client, say your Citrix server, close to your Exchange server, and you'd be in non-cache mode. And it will talk straight to your Citrix, your Exchange server, download the mail, and it'll be all fine. Once that's been separated and your mailbox is actually stored up in the cloud, that doesn't really work too well. There's too much latency, and we have a problem. The way FS Logics approaches this is it effectively mounts a personal VHD as the profile or the Office 365 container to the user when they log in, and then they cache the Exchange data. So they move to cached Exchange mode, and they cache the OST file onto that VHD, that mounted VHD. So when Outlook is communicating, it thinks it's talking locally. It's actually talking to a mounted hard drive. Performance benefits compared to using it non-cache mode with Exchange Online is huge. So again, now that that's included within your Windows 10 licensing, and if you're using Office 365, definitely something to consider. There are other things like, so this has been a market leader for years around this space. Avanti have also got a product. So if you're using a Avanti User Workspace Manager, they've fairly recently introduced a similar technology, so a VHD mount option. So if you're running that, if you're already running Avanti for your policy, your environment manager, policy profile management type of stuff, then you could also look at that. And the last one is really around using WEM, Workspace Environment Manager. It's included in sort of the Citrix products, and really there's a couple of things that it does. It does things around CPU and memory optimization, so it'll do CPU throttling, RAM, where it'll clear unclaimed memory working sets and things like that. So it's around increasing the user density and maximizing the resources you've got. And the other one is really around, this is to do with specifically around logon performance. It's moving some of those logon activities to post-logon activities that you don't actually need before you log on. So things like drive mappings and printer mappings, which can take a long time, users don't necessarily need those as soon as the desktop session has been presented. So what we can do is we can move that so they log in, they get their desktop session, but in the background, they're doing these non-essential activities or activities that are not needed before the desktop's presented. And that just improves the user experience because they're not waiting for these drive mapping and printer mapping things to be completed before they actually get access to their desktop. Quite a few other ones, but these are just a couple of sort of, I guess, quick wins. They're the big wins that you want to get, where you can see some really substantial improvements to performance with those. And finally, just to summarize what we spoke about here. The first thing we spoke about is publishing incompatible applications via virtual apps. So this is really around don't let your Windows 10 migration stall because you're waiting on apps to be moved into a compatible state for Windows 10. Second one is around using virtual desktops for that centralized management, and that's particularly around the Windows updates and that high update cadence. We've got Citrix Endpoint Management and Content Collaboration. So this is their mobile and share file, just to ease that device management and data management challenge that you can have with Windows 10 migration. As you can see, there's quite a few different options for delivering Windows 10 via Citrix. And it's really a matter of defining the requirements to work out which one suits you best, because they all have unique use cases. There's some overlap, but generally one will be a better option than another based on your requirements. Now, WVD, sure, it's reignited the interest in VDI because it's basically free, and people are saying, well, actually, is it worth it? But at the moment, functionally, it's still limited compared to the Citrix products. And the last point is really just make sure you optimize your Windows 10 images in VDI, because it can make a really big difference. So it does make a big difference, and we all want happy users, don't we? So that's all I've got for today. If you've got any questions or want to know any more, speak to your account manager. If you don't have an account manager, maybe just leave me a message in the notes of the chat, and I can get you in touch with the relevant person. But thank you for listening, and goodbye.